He smiled at the executives and said, "This is Ellie. She's my housekeeper. I let her tag along tonight." The room laughed. Glasses clinked. Ellie stood beside him, swallowing every drop of humiliation in silence. Then the billionaire CEO took the stage, looked straight at her, and announced one name that drained all color from Clinton's face. Because the woman he had just called the help was about to walk up to that microphone. And everything satisfying about his perfect little life was about to shatter in front of everyone who mattered. Before we continue, let us know in the comments section where in the world you're tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Clinton Mitchell had spent his entire adult life trying to belong. Growing up as the only black kid in a wealthy Connecticut neighborhood, he learned early that survival meant assimilation. He ironed out his accent, studied the way his white classmates carried themselves, and buried every part of himself that felt too different, too noticeable, too black. By 36, he had carved out a respectable position as a mid-level financial analyst at Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious investment firms in Manhattan. He wore tailored suits, drove a German sedan, and attended the right happy hours with the right people. But no matter how high he climbed, a voice in his head kept whispering that he didn't quite fit, that everyone could see through him, that he was always one wrong move away from being exposed as an outsider. Then there was Ellie. He had met her 7 years ago at a charity auction, and she had taken his breath away. Smart, elegant, and undeniably beautiful, Ellie Spencer was everything Clinton admired. When they married 2 years later, he convinced himself they would build something extraordinary together. But somewhere along the way, Ellie stopped being his partner and started becoming his problem. It wasn't that he didn't love her. He did, in his own complicated way. But in the world Clinton desperately wanted to conquer, a black wife was a liability. Every time they walked into a room full of his white colleagues, he felt their eyes linger a second too long. Every time someone asked about her, he found himself minimizing, deflecting, changing the subject. He told himself he was protecting her from judgment. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was protecting himself. Ellie worked in consulting. That much Clinton knew. She ran some kind of boutique firm, met with clients, traveled occasionally for business. But the specifics had never interested him enough to ask. Whenever she tried to share details about a project or a meeting, he would nod absently and steer the conversation back to his own career, his own ambitions, his own frustrations. Over 5 years of marriage, he had never once asked her the simple question, "What exactly do you do?" And Ellie, tired of being ignored, had stopped offering. She operated under her maiden name professionally, M. Spencer Consulting, a deliberate choice she had made long before meeting Clinton. Her firm was small by design, exclusive, working only with select clients who valued discretion and strategic brilliance over flashy marketing. Most people in her industry knew her reputation. The right people knew her name. Her husband was not one of them. For Ellie, his disinterest had become a silent test. If he truly loved her, truly respected her, wouldn't he want to know? Wouldn't basic curiosity about her life, her work, her world be the bare minimum? 5 years she had waited for him to ask. 5 years of watching him dismiss her with a wave of his hand or a distracted nod. 5 years of feeling invisible in her own marriage. She had her answer. She just hadn't decided what to do with it yet. Then came the invitation. Clinton had been waiting for something like this his entire career. The Sterling Foundation annual gala was the event of the year, a black tie affair hosted by Richard Sterling himself, the billionaire CEO whose name opened doors across every industry. An invitation meant you mattered. It meant you had arrived. When the embossed envelope appeared on his desk, Clinton's hands trembled as he opened it. This was his chance. One night to network with the most powerful people in the city. One night to prove he belonged at their level. There was just one complication. The invitation was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Clinton Mitchell. That evening, Clinton sat across from Ellie at their kitchen table, choosing his words carefully. "I need you to understand how important this is," he said, leaning forward with intensity. "This gala could change everything for my career. Richard Sterling will be there. Investors, executives, people who could make or break my future." Ellie listened, her expression neutral. "And?" Clinton shifted uncomfortably. "I just need us to be strategic about how we present ourselves." "Strategic," Ellie repeated, the word flat on her tongue. "You know how these people are." He waved his hand vaguely. "They have certain expectations. I'm not saying it's right, but it's reality. And I need to play the game if I want to move up." Ellie set down her glass of water. "What exactly are you asking me, Clinton?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "I need you to dress simply. Nothing flashy. And maybe let me do most of the talking. If anyone asks about you, I'll just say you're—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "I'm what?" "Someone who helps around the house." The words came out in a rush. "It's easier than explaining your work, which honestly I couldn't do anyway since I don't really know the details. This way, no complicated questions, no awkward conversations. We blend in, I make the connections I need, and we go home. Simple." Ellie stared at him for a long moment. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. "You want to introduce your wife as your housekeeper," she said slowly, as if testing the weight of each word. "Not exactly. Just someone who helps out. It's not that different from what I actually do?" Ellie's voice remained steady, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Which you've never bothered to learn." Clinton exhaled sharply. "This isn't about that. This is about one night, one event. I'm not asking you to be someone else forever. I'm asking you to help me." Help him. That phrase had defined their marriage. Help him network, help him look successful, help him by staying quiet, staying small, staying invisible. Ellie thought about the woman she was when they first met. Confident, accomplished, whole. She thought about how piece by piece she had allowed herself to be diminished to fit into the narrow space Clinton had carved out for her. She thought about 5 years of silence, of waiting, of hoping he would see her, and she made a decision. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it." Clinton's face flooded with relief. "Thank you. Really, Ellie, this means—" "I know what it means." She didn't tell him that she had received her own invitation to the gala weeks ago, a personal request from Richard Sterling himself asking her to host the event. She didn't tell him that her firm had been consulting for the Sterling Foundation for 3 years, or that she had designed the entire concept for this year's gala. She didn't tell him that tomorrow night she would walk into that ballroom with 2 outfits, the plain dress he had chosen for her and the red gown she would change into when she took the stage. Clinton wanted a test? Fine. She would give him one. She would stand beside him and let him show the world exactly who he was. And when the truth came out, as it inevitably would, she would finally have her answer about whether this marriage was worth saving. That night, Ellie stood alone in their bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The simple black dress hung on the closet door, a costume for the role her husband had written for her. Next to it, still in its garment bag, waited the crimson gown she would wear when Richard Sterling called her name. She touched the fabric of the black dress, feeling its cheapness between her fingers. For 5 years, she had made herself small for a man who had never once tried to see her full size. Tomorrow, that would end. One way or another, she would finally know the truth about her marriage, and Clinton would learn a lesson he would never forget. The Grand Marquis Hotel rose against the Manhattan skyline like a monument to wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers hung from cathedral ceilings, their light fracturing into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across marble floors. Waiters in white gloves glided between clusters of guests, offering champagne that cost more per bottle than most people earned in a week. The Sterling Foundation annual gala had officially begun. Clinton stepped through the entrance with Ellie at his side, and for a moment he felt invincible. This was where he belonged, among the power players, the decision-makers, the people who shaped industries and moved markets. He straightened his tie and surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. "Stay close," he murmured to Ellie without looking at her. "And remember what we discussed." Ellie said nothing. She walked half a step behind him, wearing the simple black dress he had selected, her expression composed and unreadable. To anyone watching, she might have appeared timid, perhaps out of place. But behind her calm exterior, every sense was heightened, cataloging every detail, every face, every whispered conversation. Clinton moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. He had spent years perfecting this performance, and tonight it felt flawless. Within minutes, he had inserted himself into a circle of senior executives from rival firms, name-dropping and nodding along to conversations about market trends and investment strategies. Ellie stood at the edge of the group, invisible. A woman in a designer gown glanced at her, then leaned toward her companion. "Who is she?" The whisper carried just far enough for Ellie to hear. "Must be someone's +1, the companion replied dismissively. "She looks lost." Ellie kept her face neutral, but something tightened in her chest. She had built a career commanding boardrooms, advising billionaires, and reshaping corporate strategies, and here she stood, being dismissed by women who probably couldn't balance their own checkbooks. But she had agreed to this. She had chosen to play this role tonight, to give Clinton one final chance to show her who he really was. And so she waited. The test came sooner than expected. A tall man with silver hair and an expensive watch approached Clinton's group. Ellie recognized him immediately, Thomas Whitmore, the founding partner of Clinton's firm, the man whose approval Clinton had been chasing for years. "Mitchell!" Whitmore clapped Clinton on the shoulder. "Good to see you here. Sterling must think you're worth something after all." He laughed at his own joke, and Clinton laughed along, perhaps a beat too eagerly. Then Whitmore's eyes landed on Ellie. "And who's this lovely lady?" He extended his hand toward her with the patronizing smile of a man accustomed to being charmed. Clinton's body went rigid. This was the moment, the crossroads. Ellie watched him, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. "Choose me," she thought. "Just once. Choose me." Clinton cleared his throat. "This is Ellie. She, helps out around our house. You know how it is. She wanted to see what these events were like, so I figured, why not bring her along?" The words landed like stones in Ellie's stomach. Whitmore raised an eyebrow, amusement flickering across his face. "That's generous of you, Mitchell. Not many people would bring the help to something like this." "Well," Clinton said with a forced chuckle, "she's practically family at this point." Laughter rippled through the group. Someone made a comment about how hard it was to find good help these days. Another joked that Clinton was too soft-hearted for his own good. Ellie stood frozen, a polite smile fixed on her face while something inside her cracked and crumbled. She had prepared herself for this possibility, had told herself she could handle it. But hearing the words from his mouth, watching him dismiss her without a flicker of hesitation, that was something else entirely. She looked at Clinton, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man she had married, the man she had loved, the man she had given 5 years of her life to, had just erased her existence with a single sentence. And he hadn't even flinched. "So this is who you are," she thought. "When no one's watching, when you think it doesn't matter, this is who you've always been." She had her answer. Across the ballroom, the stage lights flickered on. A distinguished man in his 60s stepped up to the microphone, his presence commanding immediate attention. Richard Sterling was not particularly tall or imposing, but he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. When he spoke, people listened. "Good evening, everyone," Sterling began, his voice warm but authoritative. "Thank you for joining us for the Sterling Foundation's annual celebration of philanthropy and partnership." Clinton watched with hungry eyes. This was the man he needed to impress, the billionaire whose endorsement could fast-track careers and open doors that would otherwise remain forever closed. Sterling continued with the usual pleasantries, thanking sponsors and highlighting the foundation's achievements. Clinton barely heard the words, too busy calculating how he might engineer an introduction later in the evening. Then Sterling's tone shifted. "Now," he said, "I have the distinct pleasure of introducing someone very special. This year's gala wouldn't exist without her vision and expertise. She's been the strategic mind behind our foundation's most successful initiatives for the past 3 years, and tonight, she's graciously agreed to serve as our host." Clinton's attention sharpened. A strategic advisor to Sterling himself. This was exactly the kind of person he needed to meet. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling announced, "please welcome the brilliant Ellie Spencer." For a moment, Clinton didn't react. The name bounced around his skull without finding purchase. Ellie Spencer. Ellie. Spencer. Then the applause began, and everyone in his circle turned to look at the woman standing beside him. Ellie met his eyes with perfect composure. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I need to go to work." She walked away, leaving Clinton rooted to the spot as the crowd parted for her like water around a stone. He watched her cross the ballroom floor, watched her disappear briefly behind the stage, and watched her emerge moments later, transformed. The plain black dress was gone. In its place, Ellie wore a stunning crimson gown that caught the light with every movement. She looked like a queen ascending her throne, confident and luminous and utterly in command. When she took the microphone from Sterling, the room erupted in applause. "Thank you, Richard," Ellie said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the ballroom. "And thank you all for being here tonight. What we accomplish together has the power to change lives." Clinton couldn't move. His brain kept short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the woman on stage with the woman he thought he knew. His wife, the strategic advisor to a billionaire, the host of the most prestigious gala of the year, his wife, whom he had just introduced as his housekeeper. Around him, the dynamics shifted with brutal speed. The executives who had laughed at his joke about the help now stared at him with expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed contempt. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Wait, that's his wife? He said she was his housekeeper. Did he not know? How do you not know what your own wife does?" Thomas Whitmore fixed Clinton with a cold, assessing look that contained years of judgment compressed into a single glance. Without a word, he turned and walked away. Others followed, peeling off from Clinton's orbit as if proximity to him had suddenly become toxic. Within minutes, Clinton stood alone. On stage, Ellie commanded the room with the ease of someone born to lead. She introduced speakers, guided transitions, and sprinkled in moments of warmth and humor that drew genuine laughter from the crowd. She was magnetic, brilliant, everything Clinton had never bothered to see, and not once did she look in his direction. The gala continued around Clinton like a river flowing past a stone. He stood at the margins, watching his wife shine, while the professional world he had worked so hard to penetrate closed its doors against him. Every conversation seemed to stop when he approached. Every smile turned brittle. Word had spread with remarkable efficiency. Clinton Mitchell, the man who called his wife a housekeeper, had become a cautionary tale told in real time. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost meaning. When Ellie finally stepped off stage to a standing ovation, Clinton pushed through the crowd to reach her. He found her surrounded by admirers. Business cards exchanged hands. Richard Sterling himself was congratulating her, speaking in animated tones about expansion and new projects. The VIPs who had ignored Ellie earlier now competed for her attention. Clinton waited at the edge of the circle until the crowd thinned enough for him to approach. Ellie. She turned to face him, and the warmth that had animated her on stage vanished. What remained was something cold and distant, the look of a woman who had already made up her mind. Clinton, you're the host? The question came out strangled, accusatory. You work for Sterling? Why didn't you tell me? Ellie's expression didn't change. Did you ever ask? What? 5 years, Clinton. Her voice was low, meant only for him. 5 years of marriage. Did you ever once ask me about my work, my clients, what I actually do? Clinton opened his mouth, then closed it. The honest answer clawed at his throat. No, he hadn't. He had never been interested enough to ask. Every time I tried to share something with you, Ellie continued, you changed the subject. You talked over me. You made it clear that my world didn't matter because it wasn't your world. That's not fair. You never— I never what? Ellie cut him off, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the fury beneath. Never forced you to care, never demanded your attention? You're right. I didn't. I waited. I wanted to see if you would care on your own, without me having to beg for basic interest in my life. She took a breath, steadying herself. And tonight, you had one last chance, one opportunity to treat me with dignity in front of your colleagues. And what did you do? Her voice dropped to a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. You told them I was the help, Clinton. You looked at me, your wife, and told everyone I was just someone who works around the house. I was trying to protect us, Clinton said desperately. You don't understand how these people think. I was trying to keep things simple. Simple for who? The question hit him like a physical blow. For you, Ellie answered her own question. It's always for you, your career, your image, your comfort. You weren't protecting us, Clinton. You were protecting yourself from being seen with a black wife. That's not true. Isn't it? Ellie's eyes bored into his. You've spent our entire marriage trying to make me smaller, quieter, less visible, and I let you because I loved you and I thought maybe you would change. But tonight I watched you erase me without a moment's hesitation. You didn't even struggle with the decision. It came so naturally to you. Clinton felt the ground shifting beneath him. Everything he thought he understood about himself, about his marriage, about his place in the world, was crumbling. Ellie, please. We can talk about this at home. Let me explain. No. The word was final, absolute. I'm not going home with you tonight, Ellie said. You're going to leave this gala alone. And while you're sitting in that empty house, I want you to think very carefully about what you actually want from this marriage, because I need time to decide if there's anything left worth saving. Clinton reached for her arm. Ellie, don't do this. Not here. People are watching. She pulled away from his grasp. You should have thought about that before you introduced me as the help. She gathered herself with visible effort. Goodbye, Clinton. And then she turned and walked back into the crowd of admirers waiting for her attention. Richard Sterling caught her elbow, guiding her toward a cluster of international investors. Within seconds, she was absorbed back into a world where she belonged, where she was valued, where she was seen. Clinton stood alone in his tailored suit, surrounded by hundreds of people and completely isolated. The chandeliers still glittered overhead. The champagne still flowed. The gala continued as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. He made his way to the exit on unsteady legs, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor to avoid the stares he could feel following him. At the coat check, the attendant gave him a look that might have been pity or might have been contempt. Clinton couldn't tell the difference anymore. Outside, the Manhattan night was cold and indifferent. Clinton stood on the sidewalk waiting for a taxi that seemed to take forever, replaying the evening in his mind. The way Ellie had looked at him when he called her someone who helps around the house. The complete absence of surprise in her eyes. She had expected him to fail. She had given him a test, and he had failed it so thoroughly that the results weren't even close. When had he become this person? The question haunted him during the long ride home, through the silent elevator and into the apartment that suddenly felt cavernous and empty. Ellie's presence lingered everywhere. The art she had chosen for the walls, the books arranged on the shelves, the faint scent of her perfume in the hallway. Signs of a life he had never bothered to understand. Clinton sank onto the couch and stared at his hands. For the first time in his carefully constructed life, he couldn't escape the truth. He had spent so many years trying to belong to a world that would never fully accept him, that he had sacrificed the one person who had loved him anyway. He had been so afraid of being seen as different that he had tried to make his own wife invisible. And now, in the wreckage of his ambition, he was finally beginning to see the cost. The apartment stayed dark. Clinton didn't bother turning on the lights. He sat alone with his thoughts until morning came, and even then he had no answers. Only questions, painful and relentless, that demanded a reckoning he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The days that followed were the longest of Clinton's life. He went through the motions of existence, waking up, showering, putting on clothes. But the apartment felt like a museum dedicated to his failures. Ellie's things were everywhere, her presence woven into every corner, yet she herself was gone. She had checked into a hotel the night of the gala and had not returned. Clinton called her once. She didn't answer. He didn't call again. Instead, he sat with the silence and let it consume him. At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The ease with which he had said the words, the complete lack of hesitation. "She helps out around our house. I let her tag along." He had delivered those lines like an actor who had rehearsed them 1,000 times. And maybe he had. Maybe he had spent his entire life rehearsing for exactly that moment, the moment when he would choose belonging over love, acceptance over integrity, his own comfort over his wife's dignity. On the third night, a memory surfaced that he had buried long ago. He was 9 years old, standing in the cafeteria of his elementary school in Connecticut. A group of white boys had surrounded him, asking questions they already knew the answers to. "Why is your hair like that? Why is your skin so dark? Do you live in a real house? Or do your people live in trees?" He remembered the laughter. He remembered the heat of shame spreading across his face. And he remembered the decision he made in that moment. To become so much like them that they would forget he was different. To erase every trace of himself that didn't fit their world. He had spent 27 years perfecting that erasure, and Ellie had been the final casualty. 300 miles away, Ellie sat in her mother's living room in Philadelphia, finally allowing herself to cry. Her mother, Eleanor, held her without speaking, the way she had when Ellie was a little girl with scraped knees and broken hearts. "I knew," Ellie whispered into her mother's shoulder. "I knew what he would do. I just hoped I was wrong." Eleanor stroked her daughter's hair. "Sometimes we have to see people clearly before we can decide what to do with what we see." 5 years, Mama. I gave him 5 years. "And now you know?" Eleanor said gently. "The question is what you do with that knowing." Ellie pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I don't know if I can forgive him. Baby, nobody's asking you to forgive anything right now." Eleanor cupped her daughter's face in her hands. "You just need to figure out what you need. Everything else can wait." Back in New York, Clinton made a decision. Not a grand gesture, not flowers or apologies or dramatic declarations. Something quieter and more difficult. He found a therapist who specialized in identity issues and internalized racism, and he made an appointment. The first session was brutal. He sat across from Dr. Patricia Williams, a black woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an unflinching gaze, and tried to explain why he was there. "I introduced my wife as my housekeeper," he said, the words scraping against his throat. "In front of everyone, and the worst part is I didn't even think twice about it." Dr. Williams nodded slowly. "Why do you think that was?" "Because I was ashamed of her." The admission felt like swallowing glass. "No, that's not right. I was ashamed of what she represented, what we represented together." "And what was that?" Clinton stared at his hands. "Two black people in a white world. I spent my whole life trying to be the exception, the one they could accept because I was different. And having a black wife made it harder to be the exception." "So you tried to make her invisible?" "Yes." The sessions continued. Week after week, Clinton excavated parts of himself he had buried so deep he had forgotten they existed. The childhood taunts, the desperate need to belong, the way he had learned to hate the parts of himself that made him different, and how that hatred had slowly poisoned everything it touched. He didn't contact Ellie during this time. He knew that words meant nothing without change, and change couldn't be rushed or performed. So he did the work in silence. He read books he should have read years ago. He started journaling, something he had always dismissed as pointless, and forced himself to confront his thoughts on paper where he couldn't hide from them. Slowly, painfully, he began to see himself clearly. And what he saw was a man who had been so afraid of rejection that he had rejected himself first, and everyone who loved him along the way. 3 months after the gala, Ellie agreed to meet him. They chose a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan world where their lives had collided. Ellie arrived first and sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. When Clinton walked in, she barely recognized him. He looked older somehow, the arrogance stripped away, leaving something raw and more uncertain in its place. He sat across from her and didn't try to touch her or make excuses. "Thank you for meeting me," he said quietly. Ellie nodded, waiting. "I've been seeing a therapist," Clinton continued, 3 times a week. "I'm trying to understand why I became the person who could do what I did to you." "And what have you learned?" Clinton took a breath. "That I've spent my whole life trying to be acceptable to people who were never going to fully accept me anyway. And that somewhere along the way, I started seeing my own blackness as the enemy, including yours." Ellie's expression remained guarded, but something flickered in her eyes. "I'm not asking you to come back," Clinton said. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. Not because I want to save our marriage, but because I don't want to be that person anymore. The person who could look at his wife and see a liability instead of a partner." Ellie was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but heavy with pain. "That night broke something in me, Clinton. You didn't just embarrass me, you erased me. In front of everyone, you made me nothing. I know. And I don't know if I can ever forget how easily those words came out of your mouth. I know that too." Ellie looked out the window at the rain. "I'm not ready to make any decisions, but I see that you're trying, and that means something." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a door left slightly open, and for now, that was enough. 6 months later, Ellie stood at the podium of the National Women's Business Conference, delivering a keynote speech about resilience and authenticity. The audience of 500 hung on her every word as she spoke about the pressure to shrink oneself for others' comfort, and the liberation that came from refusing to do so. In the back of the auditorium, Clinton sat alone. He wasn't there to network or be seen. He wasn't trying to engineer introductions or climb any ladders. He was simply there to listen to his wife, really listen, perhaps for the first time in their marriage. When Ellie finished to thunderous applause, a man Clinton vaguely recognized from his old firm leaned over. "That's your wife, isn't it?" the man asked. "She's incredible. You must be proud." Clinton considered the question. "She doesn't need me to be proud of her," he said finally. She's been proud of herself all along. I just took too long to notice." After the event, Ellie descended from the stage, surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. Clinton waited at the edge of the crowd, making no move to push forward or claim her attention. When the last handshake was finished and the last business card exchanged, Ellie looked up and found him there. She walked toward him slowly, reading his face for any trace of the old Clinton, the performer, the climber, the man who had valued image over truth. What she found instead was someone quieter, someone still learning, someone who had finally stopped trying to be seen and started trying to see. She stopped in front of him and extended her hand. Clinton took it gently, like holding something precious he had almost lost forever. They walked out together into the evening air, two people at the beginning of a long road, with no guarantees about where it would lead. But for the first time, they were walking as equals. Because respect isn't proven on stages or in front of crowds. It's proven in the quiet moments, when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain. It's proven in the way you treat the person beside you when the lights go down and the applause fades away. And Clinton was finally learning that lesson, one honest day at a time.